My son passed away 4 years ago. Every single month since that terrible day, I stood in the freezing Pennsylvania snow to hand his grieving widow $800 in cash for my grandson's asthma medication. I wore work boots with holes in the soles just to afford it. But last Tuesday, the neighbor grabbed my arm, dragged me onto her porch, and shoved an electronic tablet into my chest. "Stop sending her money, Rick," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Look at the camera. What I saw on that screen did not just break my heart. It unleashed a monster I did not know I had inside me. Before I tell you what was on that tape, hit the like button. If you believe the truth always comes to light. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is right now. I always read your comments. My name is Rick Stanton. I am 70 years old, and I spent 40 years of my life as a civil engineer, building concrete bridges across this state. My hands are thick and scarred from decades of twisting rebar and pouring cement, but they trembled as I stood on the icy front porch of my daughter-in-law Monica's house in the dead of winter. The wind chill was hovering near zero, biting right through my old flannel jacket. Tucked securely in my left pocket was a thick white envelope containing $800 in crisp $20 bills. Tucked under my right arm was a wooden toy fire truck. I had spent the last 3 evenings in my cold garage carving and painting that truck for my 7-year-old grandson, Leo. Leo is all I have left of my son, Lucas. Lucas died in a horrific highway rollover crash 4 years ago. Since that day, my entire existence shrunk down to one single purpose, making sure his boy was taken care of. Leo has severe asthma, the kind that requires expensive daily inhalers and frequent doctor visits. Monica always told me her bank accounts were frozen or overdrawn because of hospital bills, so I brought cash. Every first Tuesday of the month, I drove across town, skipping my own meals and ignoring my own mounting bills just to hand her that envelope. I raised a heavy, calloused knuckle and knocked on the thick oak door. The sound echoed in the quiet suburban neighborhood, but no one answered. I knocked again, louder this time, shifting the wooden fire truck from one arm to the other to keep my hands from going completely numb. Still nothing. The driveway was empty. I leaned forward, cupping my cold hands around my eyes to peer through the frosted glass panels beside the door. The house was completely dark inside. A part of me felt a familiar ache of sympathy. Monica was a young widow. She always told me she worked grueling night shifts at a logistics warehouse just to keep the lights on. She told me she barely slept, barely had time to eat, pouring every ounce of her energy into keeping a roof over Leo's head. I figured she was finally getting some much-needed rest, completely exhausted from the heavy burden of single motherhood. I decided I would just slip the envelope of cash through the mail slot and leave the fire truck on the welcome mat so she would find it when she woke up. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold paper of the envelope. But before I could slide it through the brass slot, a sharp hiss broke through the howling wind. "Rick! Hey, Rick! Over here!" I turned around. Standing at the edge of the property line, half hidden behind a snow-covered hedge, was Agnes. Agnes was Monica's next-door neighbor, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 60s who had lived in that neighborhood long before my son ever bought this house. She was not wearing a coat, just a thick wool sweater pulled tight over her shoulders, and she looked frantic. She did not offer a polite hello. She did not wave. She just gestured wildly for me to come over to her driveway. I frowned, my breath pluming in the freezing air. I stepped off Monica's porch, my boots crunching heavily through the fresh snow, and walked over to where Agnes was standing. Before I could even ask her how she was doing, she grabbed me by the sleeve of my jacket. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Get out of the open," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward Monica's dark windows. She pulled me into the shadows of her open garage, out of sight from the street. "Agnes, what is going on?" I asked, pulling my arm back gently. "I am just dropping off the medicine money for Leo. I think Monica is sleeping." Agnes looked at me. Her face was pale, and her jaw was set in a tight, angry line. She reached into the pocket of her sweater and pulled out a digital tablet. Her hands were shaking as she tapped the screen a few times. "Do not leave another dime at that house, Rick," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh, ragged whisper. "Do not give that woman one more cent of your hard-earned money." I stared at her completely confused. "Agnes, what are you talking about? Leo needs his inhalers." "Look at the screen, Rick," she demanded, shoving the heavy tablet right against my chest. "Just look at the camera. I pulled this from my porch security system this morning. This was recorded last night at 2 in the morning. I took the tablet. My thumb rested against the cold glass as the video began to play. The black and white night vision footage showed the front of Monica's house. It was not quiet. Even without sound, I could see the heavy bass vibrations shaking the front porch light. But that was not what made my stomach drop. A man stepped out of Monica's front door. He was not a doctor. He was not a babysitter. He was a tall, heavily tattooed man wearing a designer leather jacket that cost more than I made in a month. He walked with the kind of arrogant swagger that only comes from untouchable confidence. He pulled a woman into frame. It was Monica. She was not wearing a warehouse work uniform. She was wearing an expensive cocktail dress, wrapping her arms around the tattooed man's neck and kissing him deeply before handing him a thick, white envelope. An envelope identical to the one currently burning a hole in my pocket. I watched paralyzed as the man walked down the driveway, casually tossed my envelope into the trunk of a brand-new jet-black Mercedes and slammed it shut. My chest tightened, but Agnes tapped the screen again. "Look at the corner," she whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the background of the video. The camera angle shifted slightly, catching the edge of Monica's backyard patio. My breathing stopped completely. Standing there, bathed in the harsh security light, was my 7-year-old grandson. Leo was wearing only a thin, short-sleeved pajama shirt. It was 15 degrees last night. The boy was shivering violently, his small hands pressed flat against the glass sliding door. He was crying in terror. He was locked out. I watched as my grandson stood in the freezing snow for 2 full hours while the party raged inside. The heavy glass door had been dead-bolted from the inside. The cold winter wind howling through the open garage suddenly felt like nothing compared to the ice in my veins. My jaw locked so tight my teeth ached. Every single excuse I had ever made for Monica, every time I forgave her for being distant, every time I accepted her tragic stories about hospital bills shattered into pieces right then and there. I did not say a word. I just stood there in the freezing garage staring at the screen. The wooden toy fire truck in my hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. For 4 years, I had eaten canned soup and worn rags to keep my dead son's family afloat. But the woman I had been bleeding for was not a grieving widow. She was a monster, and I was going to tear her world apart. I handed the tablet back to Agnes without saying a word. My hands were steady, the initial shock burning away to absolute cold clarity. Agnes looked at me with deep pity. She had seen me build commercial housing developments from bare earth and tear down reinforced concrete walls. Now she was watching me realize my entire life for the past 4 years was built on a malicious lie. I marched back across the property line without hesitation. The fresh snow crunched heavily under my work boots. I raised my heavy boot and kicked the base of the thick oak door. The loud sound cracked through the freezing air like a gunshot. I kicked it again, the impact rattling the brass hinges. I could hear muffled shuffling inside, followed immediately by a heavy deadbolt clicking back. The door swung open, and there she was. Monica. She wore a thick, oversized wool sweater, her dark hair pulled up in a messy bun, playing the exhausted widow to absolute perfection. "Oh my God. Rick," she gasped, pressing a hand over her chest. "What are you doing standing here so early? You scared me. I was dead asleep. I had a brutal double shift at the warehouse last night." I pushed my way into the foyer. The sudden heat hit my freezing face, but the lingering smell caught my attention immediately. She did not smell like stale sweat or a dusty warehouse floor. She smelled like expensive designer perfume. Heavy floral notes of a high-end fragrance filled the narrow entryway. It was a scent a struggling single mother choosing between groceries and asthma medication could never afford. My sharp eyes scanned the room looking for any trace of the wild party, but the space had been hastily tidied up. "Where is my grandson?" I asked, my voice dangerously flat. I kept my hands buried deep in my jacket pockets so she would not see them clenching into fists. Monica blinked, thrown off guard. "He is upstairs in his room, fast asleep." "Rick, what is wrong with you? You are tracking snow everywhere." I ignored her and took a step forward, forcing her to back up against the banister. "I want to know whose jet-black Mercedes was parked on your front lawn at 2 in the morning, I said, staring directly into her panicked eyes. "And I want to know why Leo has a dark purple bruise on his left wrist. I had noticed it on the tablet screen." Monica froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost in the dim hallway light. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. I saw pure terror in her eyes. She knew the carefully constructed narrative of the grieving widow was crumbling under my gaze, but then she adapted. Within the blink of an eye, the panic vanished, replaced by a masterclass performance of weeping desperation. She covered her face with her hands, letting out a wretched sob that echoed through the quiet house. "Oh, Rick," she wailed, her shoulders shaking violently. "I did not want to tell you. I was so ashamed. I have been trying to handle it all by myself, but it is just too much." I stood there motionless, letting her weave her web. "That man, the one with the car, he is my new landlord, Derek," she cried, wiping a tear from her cheek. "He came over in the middle of the night because I am 3 months behind on rent. The $800 you send Rick, it helps, but it barely covers Leo's emergency inhalers and hospital copays. Derek is ruthless. He showed up pounding on the door, threatening to evict us right out into the snow if I did not give him whatever cash I had on hand." I was terrified. I gave him everything left in my purse just to make him leave. I stared at her, listening to the flawless lie. And the bruise on Leo's wrist, I asked, my tone unwavering. Why was he locked out on the freezing patio? Monica let out another dramatic sob, clutching her chest. "That was the most terrifying night of my life," she wept. "Leo has been sleepwalking again. His pediatrician said it is a trauma response from losing his father. When the landlord was yelling at me, I was so distracted that I did not hear Leo wander downstairs. He walked right out the back door in his sleep. When the landlord left, I turned around and saw the back door wide open. The wind must have blown it shut behind him, and the faulty latch locked him out. I found him freezing on the patio. I grabbed his wrist too hard, pulling him back inside because I was in full panic mode. I am a terrible mother, Rick. I am failing him. I am failing Lucas." And there it was. The ultimate weapon. She invoked my dead son's name to shield herself. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. "Are you accusing me of something, Rick?" she whispered, her voice cracking with perfect engineered fragility. "Lucas is looking down from heaven right now. It would break his heart to see his father interrogating his widow, accusing me of hurting our boy when I am sacrificing everything to keep him safe. Do you really think I would ever let anything bad happen to the only piece of my husband I have left? Any normal grieving father would have crumbled right then and there. Any normal grandfather would have felt a crushing wave of guilt for daring to question this desperate woman. And for a moment, I pretended to be exactly that man. I let my shoulders slump. I let a sigh of defeat escape my lips. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the thick white envelope containing $800, and placed it gently on the entryway table next to a vase of fake flowers. "I am sorry, Monica," I muttered, forcing my voice to sound remorseful and broken. "I did not mean to accuse you. I am just worried about the boy. Times are hard right now. Buy him warm clothes and make sure he gets his medicine on time." Monica sniffled, reaching out to squeeze my arm gently. "Thank you, Rick. You are a good man. Lucas was incredibly lucky to have you as a father." I handed her the wooden toy fire truck, turned around, and walked out. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me. I walked down the long driveway, my heavy boots crushing the snow. I had played the apologetic, naive old man perfectly, but my mind was a raging storm of calculated anger. Her explanation was seamless, rehearsed, and entirely logical. But my gut, the instinct honed by decades of dealing with lying contractors and corrupt city officials, was screaming at me. A sleepwalking child does not wait outside in the freezing winter cold for 2 hours without pounding on the glass. A ruthless landlord collecting rent does not receive a deep, passionate kiss on the lips before driving swiftly away into the night inside a massive luxury vehicle. 3 days passed since that morning on the freezing porch. I did not confront Monica again. I did not call her. I needed to see my grandson away from that house, away from her watchful eyes. I called on Friday afternoon and kept my voice light, cheerful, playing the role of the oblivious, generous grandfather. I told her I wanted to take Leo out for pizza and a movie to give her a break from her warehouse shifts. She agreed immediately, likely thrilled to have a few hours alone, perhaps to invite her dangerous landlord back over. When I picked Leo up, the boy looked smaller than I remembered. His winter coat hung loosely on his frail shoulders. His pale face was buried deep in his scarf. We drove to a small, quiet pizza parlor across town, a place with worn leather booths and dim lighting. I ordered a large pepperoni pizza, his favorite, and slid into the booth across from him. Leo did not speak much on the drive over. He just stared out the window, his small hands gripped tightly in his lap. When the waitress brought the pizza and set it on the table, Leo reacted in a way that made my stomach turn. He did not grab a slice with the eager excitement of a 7-year-old. He hesitated, looking around the room nervously, and then looked at me as if asking for permission to eat. I smiled warmly, trying to hide the growing knot of dread in my chest. "Go ahead, buddy," I said softly. "Eat as much as you want." He grabbed a slice and began to devour it. He ate with a frantic, desperate hunger, chewing fast and swallowing without tasting. It was the hunger of a child who did not know when his next meal would come. I watched him, my heart breaking into a million pieces. Monica was receiving $800 from me every single month, supposedly for his medication and food. Yet here was my grandson eating like a starving animal. "Slow down, Leo," I said gently. "There is plenty of food. We can order another one if you are still hungry." He nodded quickly, but he did not slow down. A smear of red tomato sauce clung to his left cheek. Without thinking, I reached my hand across the table to wipe it away with a napkin. The moment my hand moved toward his face, Leo reacted. He did not just pull away. He flinched violently. His entire body convulsed backward into the booth. He threw both of his small arms up over his head, shielding his face in a defensive posture, his eyes squeezed tightly shut. He let out a sharp, terrified whimper. My hand froze in midair. The napkin fell from my fingers. Children who are sleepwalking do not develop that kind of flinch. Children who bump into doors do not shield their faces in absolute terror when someone reaches out to them. That was the flinch of a child who was used to being struck. That was the reflex of a victim. I slowly lowered my hands and placed them flat on the table where he could see them. I kept my voice incredibly soft, forcing away the violent rage building in my throat. "It is okay, Leo. It is just me. I was just wiping some sauce off your cheek. I will not hurt you. I promise you I will never let anyone hurt you." Leo slowly opened his eyes. He lowered his arms, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. He looked down at his half-eaten pizza, his lower lip trembling. "I am sorry, Grandpa," he whispered. "I am sorry." "You have absolutely nothing to be sorry for," I said. I took a slow, deep breath. I knew I had to tread carefully. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my posture relaxed. "Leo, I need to ask you a question, and you can tell me the truth. You are safe with me. Do you understand?" He gave a tiny nod, not meeting my eyes. I asked about the man who visits the house. I asked about the landlord. I kept my tone casual, trying not to sound interrogating. Does Derek come over often? Is he the one making you afraid? The color instantly drained from Leo's face. He looked absolutely terrified. He quickly glanced under the table, then peered over the back of the booth, as if the tattooed man might materialize out of thin air. He leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a panicked, hurried whisper. "Grandpa, please do not tell Uncle Derek you gave us money. Please do not tell him I talked to you." I kept my voice steady, though my blood was boiling. "I will not tell him anything, Leo." "Why are you so afraid of Uncle Derek?" Leo swallowed hard. Tears welled up in his eyes, spilling over his pale cheeks. "He said if I take your money, or if I tell you what happens at home, he will lock me in the dark basement. He said he will lock me down there and never let me out, just like he did to Daddy Lucas." The bustling noise of the pizza parlor faded into a hollow ringing in my ears. The world seemed to stop spinning. I stared at my grandson, unable to comprehend the words that had just left his mouth. Just like he did to Daddy Lucas. My son died in a tragic highway rollover. The police report stated his truck lost control on an icy curve. He flipped over the guardrail and died on impact. It was an accident. A devastating random tragedy. But now my terrified grandson was telling me that this ex-convict, this violent stranger who was sleeping with my daughter-in-law and stealing my money, had locked my son in a basement. "Leo," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What do you mean? What did he do to your daddy?" Leo shook his head frantically, wiping his tears with his sleeves. "I am not supposed to say it. Mommy said it was a bad dream. She said I imagined it and that I am a liar. But I heard them, Grandpa. Before Daddy went to heaven, Uncle Derek came over. They went to the basement and Daddy was yelling. Then Daddy left in his truck and he never came back. Please do not let them lock me in the dark, Grandpa. Please." I reached across the table and gently took his small, trembling hands in mine. My calloused fingers wrapped around his cold hands, offering the only warmth I had left. I looked directly into his tear-filled eyes. "You are never going back to the dark, Leo. I swear it on my life." I drove him home later that evening. I did not go inside. I handed him back to the woman destroying him and smiled a warm, clueless smile. Driving back to my cramped apartment, grief vanished completely, leaving behind a cold, lethal focus. The mourning father was officially dead. The predator was awake. I would now slowly hunt them all down. I handed the tablet back to Agnes without saying a word. My hands were remarkably steady, the initial shock burning away into absolute cold clarity. Agnes looked at me with deep pity. She had seen me build commercial housing developments from bare earth and tear down reinforced concrete walls. Now she was watching me realize my entire life for the past 4 years was built on a malicious lie. I marched back across the property line without hesitation. The fresh snow crunched heavily under my work boots. I raised my heavy boot and kicked the base of the thick oak door. The loud sound cracked through the freezing air like a gunshot. I kicked it again, the impact rattling the brass hinges. I could hear muffled shuffling inside, followed immediately by a heavy deadbolt clicking back. The door swung open, and there she was. Monica. She wore a thick, oversized wool sweater, her dark hair pulled up in a messy bun, playing the exhausted widow to absolute perfection. "Oh my God, Rick," she gasped, pressing a hand over her chest. "What are you doing standing here so early? You scared me. I was dead asleep. I had a brutal double shift at the warehouse last night." I pushed my way into the foyer. The sudden heat hit my freezing face, but the lingering smell caught my attention immediately. She did not smell like stale sweat or a dusty warehouse floor. She smelled like expensive designer perfume. Heavy floral notes of a high-end fragrance filled the narrow entryway. It was a scent a struggling single mother choosing between groceries and asthma medication could never afford. My sharp eyes scanned the room looking for any trace of the wild party, but the space had been hastily tidied up. "Where is my grandson?" I asked, my voice dangerously flat. I kept my hands buried deep in my jacket pockets so she would not see them clenching into fists. Monica blinked, thrown off guard. "He is upstairs in his room fast asleep." "Rick, what is wrong with you? You are tracking snow everywhere." I ignored her and took a step forward, forcing her to back up against the banister. "I want to know whose jet black Mercedes was parked on your front lawn at 2 in the morning, I said, staring directly into her panicked eyes. "And I want to know why Leo has a dark purple bruise on his left wrist." Monica froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost in the dim hallway light. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. I saw pure terror in her eyes. She knew the carefully constructed narrative of the grieving widow was crumbling under my gaze. But then she adapted. Within the blink of an eye, the panic vanished, replaced by a masterclass performance of weeping desperation. She covered her face with her hands, letting out a wretched sob that echoed through the quiet house. "Oh, Rick," she wailed, her shoulders shaking violently. "I did not want to tell you. I was so ashamed. I have been trying to handle it all by myself, but it is just too much." I stood there motionless, letting her weave her web. "That man, the one with the car, he is my new landlord, Derek," she cried, wiping a tear from her cheek. "He came over in the middle of the night because I am 3 months behind on rent. The $800 you send Rick, it helps, but it barely covers Leo's emergency inhalers and hospital copays. Derek is ruthless. He showed up pounding on the door, threatening to evict us right out into the snow if I did not give him whatever cash I had on hand." I was terrified. I gave him everything left in my purse just to make him leave. I stared at her, listening to the flawless lie. And the bruise on Leo's wrist, I asked, my tone unwavering. Why was he locked out on the freezing patio? Monica let out another dramatic sob, clutching her chest. "That was the most terrifying night of my life," she wept. "Leo has been sleepwalking again. His pediatrician said it is a trauma response from losing his father. When the landlord was yelling at me, I was so distracted that I did not hear Leo wander downstairs. He walked right out the back door in his sleep. When the landlord left, I turned around and saw the back door wide open. The wind must have blown it shut behind him, and the faulty latch locked him out. I found him freezing on the patio. I grabbed his wrist too hard, pulling him back inside because I was in full panic mode. I am a terrible mother, Rick. I am failing him. I am failing Lucas. And there it was. The ultimate weapon. She invoked my dead son's name to shield herself. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. "Are you accusing me of something, Rick?" she whispered, her voice cracking with perfect engineered fragility. "Lucas is looking down from heaven right now. It would break his heart to see his father interrogating his widow, accusing me of hurting our boy when I am sacrificing everything to keep him safe. Do you really think I would ever let anything bad happen to the only piece of my husband I have left?" Any normal grieving father would have crumbled right then and there. Any normal grandfather would have felt a crushing wave of guilt for daring to question this desperate woman. And for a moment, I pretended to be exactly that man. I let my shoulders slump. I let a sigh of defeat escape my lips. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the thick white envelope containing $800, and placed it gently on the entryway table next to a vase of fake flowers. "I am sorry, Monica," I muttered, forcing my voice to sound remorseful and broken. "I did not mean to accuse you. I am just worried about the boy. Times are hard right now. Buy him warm clothes and make sure he gets his medicine on time." Monica sniffled, reaching out to squeeze my arm gently. "Thank you, Rick. You are a good man. Lucas was incredibly lucky to have you as a father." I handed her the wooden toy fire truck, turned around, and walked out. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me. I walked down the long driveway, my heavy boots crushing the snow. I had played the apologetic, naive old man perfectly. But my mind was a raging storm of calculated anger. Her explanation was seamless, rehearsed, and entirely logical. But my gut, the instinct honed by decades of dealing with lying contractors and corrupt city officials, was screaming at me. A sleepwalking child does not wait outside in the freezing winter cold for 2 hours without pounding on the glass. A ruthless landlord collecting rent does not receive a deep, passionate kiss on the lips before driving swiftly away into the night inside a massive luxury vehicle. I knew the complete, brutal truth. Now, 3 days passed since that freezing morning on the porch. I did not confront Monica again. I did not call her. I needed to see my grandson away from that house, far from her watchful eyes. I called on Friday afternoon and kept my voice light and cheerful, playing the role of the oblivious, generous grandfather. I told her I wanted to take Leo out for pizza and a movie to give her a break from her warehouse shifts. She agreed immediately, likely thrilled to have a few hours alone, perhaps to invite her dangerous landlord back over again today. When I picked Leo up, the boy looked significantly smaller than I remembered. His heavy winter coat hung loosely on his frail shoulders. His pale face was buried deep in his thick woolen scarf. We drove to a quiet pizza parlor across town, a familiar place with worn leather booths and dim lighting. I ordered a large pepperoni pizza, his absolute favorite, and slid into the booth across from him. Leo did not speak much on the drive over. He just stared out the window, his small hands gripped tightly in his lap. I watched him very closely right then. When the waitress brought the steaming pizza and set it on the table, Leo reacted in a way that made my stomach completely turn. He did not grab a slice with the eager excitement of a normal 7-year-old boy. He hesitated, looking around the busy room nervously, and then looked at me as if asking for permission to eat. I smiled warmly, trying my best to hide the growing knot of dread in my chest. "Go ahead, buddy," I said softly. "Eat as much as you want." He reached out and grabbed a large, hot, delicious pizza slice. He began to devour the food with a frantic, desperate hunger, chewing fast and swallowing without even tasting it. It was the undeniable hunger of a child who did not know when his next meal would actually come. I watched him, my heart breaking into a million jagged pieces. Monica was receiving $800 from me every single month, supposedly for his medication and daily food. Yet here was my grandson, eating like a starving animal, who had been deprived for days. "Slow down, Leo," I said gently. "There is plenty of hot food here for you to enjoy. We can order another whole pizza if you are still hungry," I added, keeping my tone comforting. He nodded quickly, but he did not slow his frantic pace. A thick smear of red tomato sauce clung to his left cheek. Without thinking, I reached my right hand across the table to wipe it away with a paper napkin. The moment my hand moved toward his face, Leo reacted instantly. He did not just pull away from my touch, he flinched violently. His entire body convulsed backward into the corner of the leather booth with an absolute raw, physical panic response. He threw both of his small arms up over his head, shielding his face in a desperate defensive posture, his eyes squeezed tightly shut. He let out a sharp, terrified whimper that cut right through the ambient noise of the restaurant. My hand froze completely in midair. The white napkin fell slowly from my fingers onto the table. Children who are merely sleepwalking do not develop that kind of extreme reflex. Children who simply bump into doors do not shield their faces in absolute terror when someone reaches out to them. That was exactly the horrifying flinch of physical abuse. That was the undeniable reflex of a victim who was used to being struck repeatedly. I slowly lowered my hands and placed them flat on the table where he could clearly see them. I kept my voice incredibly soft, forcing away the violent rage building in my throat. "It is okay, Leo. It is just me. I was just wiping some sauce off your cheek. I will not hurt you. I promise you, I will never let anyone hurt you again." Leo slowly opened his eyes, peeking out from behind his thin, trembling arms with extreme, frightened, absolute, pure caution. He lowered his arms, his small chest heaving rapidly as he tried desperately to catch his breath. He looked down at his half-eaten pizza, his lower lip trembling uncontrollably. "I am sorry, Grandpa," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I am so sorry." "You have absolutely nothing to be sorry for," I said, maintaining my gentle demeanor. I took a slow, deep breath to steady myself. I knew I had to tread very carefully to uncover the truth without scaring him further. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my posture entirely relaxed and open to make him feel completely, utterly comfortable. "Leo, I need to ask you a question, and you can tell me the absolute truth. You are completely safe with me here. Do you understand what I am saying?" He gave a tiny hesitant nod, still not meeting my eyes. "I asked about the man who visits the house. I asked about the intimidating landlord." I kept my tone casual, trying my best not to sound like I was interrogating him. "Does Derek come over often, Leo? Is he the one making you so afraid?" The remaining color instantly drained from my poor grandson and his pale, frightened face. He looked absolutely terrified. He quickly glanced under the wooden table, then peered over the back of the tall booth, as if the tattooed man might magically materialize out of thin air to punish him. He leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a panicked, hurried whisper that barely reached my ears. "Grandpa, please do not tell Uncle Derek you gave us money. Please do not tell him I talked to you today." I kept my voice perfectly steady, though my blood was boiling with a murderous, terrible heat. "I will not tell him anything, Leo. I faithfully promise." "Why are you so afraid of Uncle Derek?" I asked, waiting for his fragile response. Leo swallowed hard. Thick tears welled up in his innocent eyes, spilling rapidly over his pale cheeks. "He said if I take your money, or if I tell you what happens at home, he will lock me in the dark basement," Leo cried silently. "He said he will lock me down there and never let me out again, just like he did to Daddy Lucas." The bustling noise of the busy pizza parlor completely faded into a deep hollow, ringing in my old, tired ears. The entire world seemed to stop spinning on its axis. I stared at my grandson, utterly unable to comprehend the horrifying words that had just left his small mouth. "Just like he did to Daddy Lucas." My son died in a tragic highway rollover. The official police report stated his truck lost control on an icy curve. He flipped over the steel guardrail and died on impact. It was supposed to be a devastating random tragedy. But now my terrified grandson was telling me that this violent stranger had locked my son inside a basement before he tragically died forever. I sat completely frozen in that worn leather booth, my lungs forgetting how to draw in air. The greasy smell of pepperoni and the hum of the arcade machines in the corner of the diner vanished entirely. All I could hear was the rushing of my own blood pulsing behind my ears. My mind raced back 4 years. I remembered the harsh fluorescent lights of the county morgue. I remembered the highway patrol officer handing me my son's shattered watch in a plastic evidence bag. The official police report had stated clearly that Lucas lost control of his truck on an icy curve along Route 9. The vehicle had flipped 3 times over a steep embankment. It was an open and shut case, a tragic, unpredictable accident born from black ice and terrible, cruel luck that had shattered my world. But now sitting across from me, his small hands shaking as he clutched a paper napkin, my 7-year-old grandson had just ripped that official narrative to shreds. Lucas was not a careless driver. He was meticulous. And the timeline Leo just provided planted a seed of absolute horror in my chest. If Derek had locked Lucas in the basement, if they had fought right before Lucas got into that truck, then my son's death was not an act of God. I looked at Leo, whose eyes were wide and brimming with fresh, terrified tears. He was trembling, waiting for me to react clearly, expecting me to yell or call him a liar just like his mother did. I forced my rigid jaw to relax. I took a slow, deep breath, burying the violent storm of rage deep inside my chest so I would not frighten the boy any further. I leaned forward across the table, making sure my movements were slow and predictable. I kept my voice as soft and steady as a calm summer breeze. Leo, listen to me very carefully right now, I whispered with absolute conviction. You are not a liar. I believe you. I believe every single word you just told me. You are safe here with me, and I am not going to let Uncle Derek or anyone else put you in the dark ever again for as long as I live. But I need you to be a very brave boy right now and tell me exactly what you remember about that night. Leo sniffled, wiping his nose with the back of his sleeve. He looked around the diner one more time to ensure no one was listening. It was right before Daddy went away. He whispered, his voice trembling with the weight of the secret. Mommy told me to stay upstairs in my room and watch cartoons. But I was thirsty. I went down to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I heard loud noises coming from down the stairs. The basement door was locked from the outside. Mommy and Uncle Derek were standing in the hallway. Uncle Derek was yelling at the door, telling Daddy to stop banging on the wood. Daddy was shouting that he was going to the police. I asked what the police part meant. Leo shook his head, looking down at his lap. I do not know, Grandpa. Uncle Derek told Mommy to keep me upstairs. He said he had to go to the garage to fix Daddy's truck before he let him out. He said he was going to make sure Daddy learned his lesson. After that, Daddy left in his truck, and then the police came the next day to tell us he went to heaven. The puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind with sickening clarity. Derek was an auto mechanic. The police report mentioned that Lucas had experienced a catastrophic failure of his braking system on that icy mountain road. At the time, the insurance investigators chalked it up to worn brake lines and the freezing weather conditions. But Derek had gone to the garage to fix the truck while my son was locked in his own basement. It was not a mechanical failure. It was cold-blooded, premeditated murder disguised perfectly as a tragic highway accident. And my daughter-in-law had stood right there in the hallway letting it happen. She had orchestrated the entire tragedy to cash in on a massive life insurance policy. And she had spent the last 4 years playing the devastated widow, happily collecting my hard-earned money while sleeping with my son's killer. A dark, terrifying hatred blossomed deep inside the very pit of my stomach. It was a kind of hatred I had never experienced in my 70 years of life. I wanted to drive straight to their house, kick the front door off its hinges, and tear Derek apart with my bare hands. I wanted to make them feel the exact same sheer, unadulterated terror my helpless son must have felt when his heavy truck plunged off that dark, desolate mountain highway. But I could not do that. I looked across the table at Leo. He was watching me with those big, innocent eyes, relying entirely on me for protection. If I let my temper control me, I would end up in a prison cell, and Leo would be left completely at the mercy of those monsters. I had to be smart. I had to be methodical. I had spent 4 decades building structural foundations that could withstand hurricanes and earthquakes. Now I was going to meticulously engineer the absolute, undeniable destruction of Monica and Derek. I reached across the table and patted Leo's hand gently. Thank you for telling me the truth, buddy, I said, managing a reassuring smile. You did a really good job. Now let us finish our pizza and get some chocolate ice cream. We spent the next hour eating and talking about school, pretending the world was completely normal. When I finally drove him home, the winter sun had set, completely casting long, dark, threatening shadows over the quiet, snow-covered suburban neighborhood. I pulled slowly into Monica's paved driveway, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I had to put on the performance of a lifetime. I walked Leo up to the front porch and rang the doorbell. Monica answered, wearing a soft bathrobe, offering me a sweet, tired smile. Did you 2 boys have a nice time? She asked, perfectly playing the part of a caring mother. We had a wonderful time, I replied, matching her fake smile with a wide, oblivious grin of my own. He ate his weight in pepperoni. Make sure he stays warm tonight, Monica. Oh, I always do, Rick, she said softly. Thank you so much for taking him out. It gave me a wonderful chance to catch up on some much-needed restful sleep. She placed a hand on my shoulder, feigning deep gratitude. I nodded, said my goodbyes, and walked back to my truck. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned completely white. The grieving father was dead. The predator was now awake. I drove away into the freezing night, ready to hunt them down. I drove back to my cramped apartment, in a complete and total daze. The steering wheel felt like a block of ice under my rigid hands, but I did not turn on the heater. The biting cold radiating through the cracked windows was the only thing keeping me grounded in reality. My mind played the tiny, terrified voice of my grandson on an endless, agonizing loop, just like he did to Daddy Lucas. The words echoed over and over, drowning out the hum of the engine and the crunch of the tires against the salted asphalt. For 4 long years, I had accepted the tragic narrative handed to me by the highway patrol. I had swallowed the bitter pill of fate, believing that black ice and worn brake lines had stolen my only son. I had wept at his closed casket. I had stood in the freezing rain and watched them lower him into the frozen earth. I had poured every ounce of my remaining strength into supporting his grieving widow. But it was all an elaborate, sickening illusion. The grief that had suffocated me for 48 months began to crystallize, hardening into a sharp, lethal blade. I parked my truck outside my building and marched up the 2 flights of stairs to my apartment. I did not bother turning on the main overhead lights when I walked through the front door. The pale yellow glow from the street lamps outside cast long, distorted shadows across the living room walls. I walked straight past the kitchen and into my small, cluttered office. In the corner of the room stood a heavy steel filing cabinet. I had not opened the bottom drawer in 4 years. It was where I kept the documents related to Lucas and his accident. It was a metal tomb of painful memories that I could never bring myself to revisit. Until tonight. I dropped to my knees on the hardwood floor, grabbed the cold metal handle, and yanked the drawer open. The screech of the rusty tracks filled the silent apartment. My hands moved with a frantic mechanical precision as I dug through thick stacks of old tax returns and building permits. Finally, my fingers brushed against a thick manila folder labeled with the name of my son. I pulled it out, tossed it onto the center of my desk, and switched on the small brass reading lamp. I spread the documents across the polished wood, my eyes scanning the harsh, clinical black and white text of the official police report. I read the details of the crash with a new, terrifying perspective. The highway patrol had noted a catastrophic failure of the primary braking system. The brake lines had completely ruptured, spilling fluid across the chassis right before the vehicle reached the treacherous downhill curve on Route 9. At the time, the insurance investigators had concluded that the heavy rust and the freezing winter conditions had simply caused the old lines to snap under pressure. Lucas drove an older model truck, and mechanical failures were not entirely uncommon in those brutal winter months. But Derek was a seasoned auto mechanic. Leo had heard Derek explicitly tell Monica that he needed to go out to the garage to fix the truck before he let Lucas out of the dark basement. You do not fix a vehicle to punish a man. You sabotage it. You drain the brake fluid. You weaken the lines. You send a desperate, angry, terrified man out onto an icy mountain road in the dead of winter in a 2-ton death trap. My mind began to race backward, analyzing every single detail of the behavior Monica displayed in the months leading up to the fatal crash. I remembered how distant she had become. I remembered the hushed, tense arguments I would interrupt whenever I visited their house. Lucas had looked exhausted, his eyes haunted by dark circles, always deflecting my questions, with forced smiles and hollow reassurances. He had told me they were just going through a rough patch, dealing with the typical stresses of marriage and raising a young boy. But there was something else. 3 weeks before the accident, Lucas had called me late at night. His voice had sounded strange, tight, with an anxiety he refused to explain. He asked me for the contact information of a good divorce attorney. When I pressed him for details, he panicked, told me to forget he had asked, and abruptly hung up the phone. A week later, Monica had casually mentioned over a family dinner that they had recently updated their life insurance policies. She had framed it as a responsible, mature decision for the future of their son. It was not a responsible decision. It was a meticulously planned financial foundation for a calculated, ruthless murder. I grabbed a blank notepad and a thick black marker from my desk drawer. I started writing down the timeline connecting the fragmented dots of the past 4 years. Lucas threatening divorce, the updated life insurance policy, Derek showing up at the house, Lucas locked in the basement screaming that he was going to the police, the sabotaged brake lines, the fatal crash, the immediate massive payout, Monica playing the devastated penniless widow to extract even more money from a grieving father, Derek suddenly becoming her ruthless landlord to explain away his violent late-night presence to a terrified child. Every single piece of the puzzle snapped into place with a terrifying, undeniable symmetry. They had played me for an absolute fool. They had murdered my boy, traumatized my innocent grandson, and used my own profound grief to fund their twisted, sick fantasy. The sickening realization washed over me, but it did not break me. It did exactly the opposite. It forged my broken spirit into something entirely new. I felt a tremendous, terrifying calm settle deep inside my chest. I stood up from the desk and walked over to the small mirror hanging on the back of my office door. I stared at my own reflection in the dim yellow light. The sad, broken old man who had spent the last 4 years weeping over a cold gravestone was completely gone forever. In his place stood the ruthless, calculating site manager who had spent 40 years carving massive commercial developments out of solid bedrock. I had spent decades dealing with corrupt city officials, hostile union disputes, and ruthless corporate sharks. I knew exactly how to build an impenetrable structural foundation from the ground up. More importantly, I knew exactly how to find the critical structural weakness in a towering building and bring the entire massive thing crashing down into dust. I was not going to simply call the police. The police had already failed my son once. They had looked at a murdered man and casually called it an unfortunate accident. Calling the authorities would just give Monica and Derek a chance to hire expensive lawyers and spin their web of lies in a crowded courtroom. I was going to handle this my own way. I was going to meticulously dismantle their entire lives piece by agonizing piece. It was time to hunt them down. I did not sleep a single wink that night. I sat in the dim light of my office until the cold winter dawn began to bleed through the slatted blinds. My mind was constructing a meticulous blueprint for absolute ruin. If I confronted Monica directly with what Leo had told me, she would deny it. She would lock the doors, call the police, and claim her grieving father-in-law had lost his grip on reality. She would spin a tale of a delusional old man making wild accusations, and the system would likely believe her. The system favors the young weeping widow over the angry, hardened construction worker. I needed undeniable concrete proof. I needed to catch them completely off guard, entirely submerged in their sickening reality. To do that, I had to completely remove myself from their equation. I needed them to believe the coast was entirely clear for an extended period of time. They needed to feel so incredibly safe that they would bring their darkest secrets out into the broad daylight. I formulated a plan that required an absolute masterclass in deception. I had to smile at the woman who helped murder my son. On the following morning, at exactly 9, I picked up the telephone and dialed Monica's number. I stood in my kitchen staring out at the frozen pavement, forcing my facial muscles into a wide, pleasant smile. Human beings can hear a smile through a telephone line, and I needed my voice to radiate nothing but pure, oblivious joy. The line rang 3 times before she answered. Her voice was thick with sleep, heavily laced with the exhausted widow persona she wore like a tailored suit. "Hello, Rick," she murmured softly. "Is everything okay? It is quite early for a Saturday." I let out a hearty, booming laugh, a sound that felt like swallowing broken glass. "Everything is more than okay, Monica," I declared loudly. "I am calling with some fantastic news. You are not going to believe what just happened to me. I got a call from the Veterans Lodge about an hour ago. They held their annual winter raffle last night, and they drew my name for the grand prize. I won an all-expenses-paid fishing trip down to the Florida Keys. 2 full weeks of deep-sea fishing sunshine, and staying in a beautiful coastal cabin." There was a brief, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning rapidly in her calculating mind. 2 weeks. 14 entire days without the looming threat of her wealthy father-in-law dropping by unannounced to check on his grandson. "Oh, Rick, that is absolutely wonderful," she gasped, her tone instantly brightening with a sickeningly sweet enthusiasm. "You deserve this so much. You have been working so hard and carrying so much grief. A vacation in the warm sun is exactly what you need right now. When do you leave?" "They want me to fly out tomorrow morning," I replied smoothly. "The lodge is taking care of the flight and the accommodations. It is very sudden, but I simply cannot pass up an opportunity like this. The old bones need a break from this freezing cold weather. I just wanted to call and let you know I will be out of the state for a while. I will not have much cellular reception out on the fishing boats, so I might be hard to reach." "Do not worry about a thing," Monica assured me. Her voice was practically vibrating with barely contained excitement. "We will be perfectly fine here. You just go and have the time of your life. Lucas would be so incredibly happy to know you are finally taking some time for yourself." The invocation of my dead son's name made my vision blur with a blinding hot rage, but my voice remained perfectly steady and relentlessly cheerful. "Thank you, Monica," I said. "But there is one more thing. I know times have been very hard for you lately, with the warehouse shifts and the ruthless landlord breathing down your neck. Since my lodge is covering all the costs for this Florida trip, I have some extra cash sitting in my account. I just went to the bank and wired an extra $1,000 directly to your checking account. I want you to take a few days off from work, buy some nice groceries, keep the house warm, and spend some quality time with Leo while I am away. Think of it as an early holiday bonus." I listened intently as the breath hitched in her throat. $1,000. It was the ultimate bait. I was funding her freedom, paying her to drop her defenses and indulge in whatever twisted, dark lifestyle she was hiding from me. "Oh my God, Rick, you are too good to us," she cried, slipping effortlessly into tears of profound gratitude. "I do not know what to say. You are literally saving our lives right now. I will take the week off. I will make sure Leo has everything he needs." Thank you so much. "You just take care of my grandson," I replied, my voice dropping to a gentle, loving whisper. "That is all the thanks I will ever need." "Have a wonderful trip, Grandpa Rick," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We love you so much." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the kitchen counter. The cheerful facade instantly melted away, leaving my face set in a cold, stony grimace. She had taken the bait without a single moment of hesitation. She believed she had just won the lottery. A fully funded, unsupervised 2-week vacation to carry on her illicit affair with the very man who had terrorized my grandson and murdered my only child. She wished me a great trip, entirely unaware that she had just permanently sealed her own terrible fate. I was not going to the Florida Keys. I had never even entered a Veterans Lodge raffle. I was going exactly nowhere. Instead, I was going to purchase advanced surveillance equipment and rent an unmarked cargo van. I was going to park at the edge of her quiet neighborhood and watch her every single move. I needed to see Derek return. I needed to document his undeniable presence inside my son's house. I needed to gather a mountain of irrefutable evidence that would ensure that neither of them would ever see the light of day again. The police had failed to see the murder, but they would not be able to ignore the absolute proof I was about to collect. I opened my laptop and began searching for high-definition hidden cameras, long-range listening devices, and GPS vehicle trackers. The trap was officially set, and the desperate, greedy prey was blindly walking right into the absolute center of the killing floor. I stood completely alone in my quiet kitchen, feeling a powerful, dark sense of righteous anticipation wash over my entire being. I had successfully transformed my paralyzing, agonizing grief into a highly effective, incredibly destructive weapon. I was finally, absolutely, fully ready. The very next morning, I packed a single worn canvas duffel bag and walked out of my front door. I drove my heavy truck straight past the highway exit that would have taken me to the international airport. Instead, I navigated through the quiet morning traffic, heading back toward the affluent suburban perimeter where my daughter-in-law lived. I did not drive into her pristine neighborhood. I stopped 3 blocks away at a rundown roadside motel that catered to passing truck drivers and transient workers. The neon sign above the front office buzzed with a harsh flickering pink light, casting long shadows over the cracked asphalt parking lot. I walked into the cramped lobby and paid for 2 weeks in advance using crisp, untraceable cash. The clerk behind the thick plexiglass window did not ask any questions, and I did not offer a single unnecessary word of explanation. I unlocked the door to room number 12 and stepped inside. The air was stale, smelling faintly of old cigarette smoke and cheap industrial pine cleaner. The wallpaper was peeling at the damp corners, and the thin mattress sagged deeply in the middle. It was the absolute perfect staging ground. It was completely anonymous, entirely invisible, and dangerously close to the target. I dropped my canvas bag onto the creaking bed and unzipped the main compartment. I pulled out my heavy steel toolbox and set it carefully onto the wobbly wooden desk in the corner of the dim room. Next, I took out the small, unmarked cardboard box containing the electronic surveillance equipment I had acquired. Finally, I reached into the very bottom of my bag and pulled out a flawlessly carved wooden toy fire truck. It was an exact flawless replica of the toy I had given to Leo just a few days prior. I had spent the entire previous night in my apartment workshop carving the fresh cedar sanding, the smooth edges, and painting it the exact same vibrant shade of cherry red. My calloused hands moved with a familiar soothing rhythm as I clamped the wooden vehicle securely into a small portable vise on the desk. I selected a precise fine drill bit and began to carefully hollow out the thick undercarriage of the wooden chassis. Wood shavings fell silently onto the stained carpet as I carved a hidden secure cavity deep inside the core of the toy. I did not rush the process. I worked with the exact same meticulous patience I had used to lay the foundations of towering skyscrapers. When the hidden compartment was perfectly sized, I opened the cardboard box and retrieved the audio device. It was a compact military-grade listening bug, no larger than a silver quarter. It possessed a highly sensitive voice-activated microphone capable of picking up a hushed whisper from across a crowded room. It ran on an advanced lithium battery designed to last for a month of continuous recording. I nestled the tiny metallic disc into the hollowed-out wooden chassis, securing it firmly with a heavy drop of industrial adhesive. I carefully sealed the bottom with a thin, perfectly matched strip of cedar, sanding the seam until it was completely invisible to the naked human eye. Unless Monica decided to smash the toy with a heavy hammer, she would never find the device hidden inside. I sat on the edge of the sagging motel bed and waited for the daylight to completely fade. I watched the busy street outside my window, tracking the regular flow of passing commuter traffic as it slowly thinned into a quiet, sparse nighttime trickle. The hours crawled by with an agonizing heavy slowness, but my mind remained incredibly sharp and entirely focused. When the glowing red numbers on the bedside digital clock finally flashed 3 in the morning, I stood up and pulled on my thick, dark winter coat. I slipped the bugged wooden fire truck deep into my coat pocket and walked out into the freezing night air. I did not take my truck. I walked the 3 blocks through the biting cold, sticking to the dark frozen shadows cast by the tall neighborhood oak trees. The fresh snow muffled the heavy thud of my work boots. The suburban street was completely silent, bathed in the pale, icy glow of a full winter moon. I approached Monica's pristine 2-story house with extreme caution, my eyes scanning the dark curtained windows for any sign of wakefulness. The property was entirely dark. The jet-black Mercedes was not parked on the snow-covered lawn tonight. I moved silently up the paved driveway, sticking close to the tall, dense evergreen bushes that lined the perimeter of the front yard. I knew exactly where Leo usually left his toys when he was rushed inside. I crept up the icy wooden steps of the wide front porch, my heart beating with a steady, rhythmic thud against my ribs. There it was. Tucked neatly behind a heavy terracotta planter near the front door sat the original wooden fire truck. I reached down with a gloved hand and snatched it up swiftly, replacing it with the identical bugged replica I had carved. I placed the new toy in the exact same position, ensuring it looked entirely undisturbed. I backed away from the porch, melting back into the protective shadows of the cold night, and walked briskly back to my hidden motel room. By the time the sun began to rise over the dreary motel parking lot, I had my laptop open on the desk, securely synced to the hidden audio transmitter. I slipped a pair of heavy black headphones over my ears and waited. At exactly 7 in the morning, the device activated. A soft static hum filled my ears, followed immediately by the clear, unmistakable sound of a heavy door creaking open. I heard the tiny muffled footsteps of my grandson stepping out onto the wooden porch. I heard the familiar sharp scrape of the toy fire truck being dragged across the concrete threshold. The bug was successfully inside the house, but I knew audio alone would not be enough. I needed absolute visual proof. I needed a professional who knew exactly how to operate entirely in the shadows without leaving a single trace. I pulled out my cellular phone and dialed a number I had not called in nearly 5 years. The line rang 4 times before a gruff, gravelly voice answered. "Yeah, who is calling at this hour?" "Bill, it is Rick," I said smoothly. "I need your unique services again." Bill was a former private investigator who had spent 2 decades working deep within the murky world of corporate espionage. Back when I ran my construction firm, I used to hire him to run extensive background checks on shady contractors and dig up hidden financial dirt on rival developers. He was ruthless, highly efficient, and entirely devoid of any moral hesitation when the final paycheck was large enough. Rick, the old man, grunted, his tone shifting into mild surprise. "I thought you retired to a quiet life. What kind of trouble are you digging up now?" "I am not building anything this time, Bill," I replied coldly. "I need you to completely dismantle a man's life. I need every financial record, every hidden bank account, and every dirty secret he has ever tried to bury from the world. His name is Derek." I gave Bill the license plate number of the black Mercedes and the exact residential address of Monica's house. I also instructed him to track the exact routing of the $800 I had been sending Monica every single month for the past 4 years. I want to know exactly where every single penny of that money ends up. I told him, my voice leaving absolutely no room for any debate. Bill did not ask any further questions. He simply named his exorbitant price, which I agreed to immediately, without hesitation, and promised to have a comprehensive dossier within 48 hours. I hung up the phone and leaned back against the cheap, uncomfortable motel headboard, taking a very slow, deep breath to steady my racing heart. Over the next 2 days, I barely slept or ate anything. I sat hunched over the small, scratched wooden desk in my dim motel room. The heavy black headphones clamped tightly over my ears, intently listening to the live audio feed transmitting from the bugged wooden fire truck. I heard Monica moving around the quiet house. I heard Leo coughing softly in the background, a harsh rattling sound that made my chest tighten with a fierce, desperate, protective instinct. Then on the second evening, I heard the heavy, unmistakable thud of the front door opening, followed by a man's deep, booming, arrogant laugh. It was Derek. Monica greeted him with a passionate, lingering kiss. I listened as they sat comfortably in the living room, drinking expensive wine and openly mocking my generosity. Monica laughed cruelly about the $1,000 bonus I had sent for my supposed Florida fishing trip. She called me a pathetic, gullible old fool who was too blind to see the truth. Derek joked loudly about how incredibly easy it was to bleed me dry. Not once did they mention Leo's medical needs or my dead son's memory with any shred of respect or remorse. It took every single ounce of my willpower to remain seated in that miserable motel room instead of driving over there and ending them both. On the third morning, a sharp, rhythmic knock on my motel room door finally broke my intense concentration. I pulled off the headphones and looked through the tiny glass peephole. It was Bill. He wore a rumpled tan trench coat and held a thick manila folder tightly under his left arm. I quickly unchained the heavy door and let him step inside. Bill stepped into the dim room, his sharp eyes quickly scanning the peeling wallpaper and the advanced electronic surveillance equipment scattered across the desk. He did not judge my strange surroundings. He simply walked over to the small circular table near the window, pulled out a chair, and dropped the heavy folder onto the scratched formica surface. He looked up at me and his weathered, wrinkled face was unusually grim. "I have done a lot of ugly corporate jobs for you over the decades, Rick," he said quietly, pulling a pair of reading glasses from his coat pocket. "But this one is by far the most sickening, twisted thing I have ever had to dig up. Sit down. You are going to want to be sitting for this." I pulled up the remaining chair and sat directly across from him. Posture completely rigid, and my jaw clenched tight. Bill opened the thick folder and slid a stack of highlighted bank statements across the table toward me. "Let us start with the money you have been sending your daughter-in-law," he began, tapping a thick, calloused finger against a highlighted transaction row. "You thought that $800 a month was paying a strict landlord for back rent and covering your grandson's vital medical expenses." I tracked the routing numbers meticulously. "The money goes into Monica's primary checking account, just exactly as you intended. But less than 24 hours later, every single month without fail, that exact same amount is transferred out into a secondary hidden account." Bill slid another paper forward. "This secondary account is not linked to any property management firm or residential landlord. It is directly linked to an exclusive, high-stakes VIP casino. Rewards card registered at a major offshore gambling boat. The card is firmly registered under Derek's name. They are not paying rent, Rick. They are taking the money meant for your grandson's asthma inhalers and feeding it directly into slot machines and blackjack tables." I stared at the banking records, watching the undeniable paper trail of their absolute greed. The raw, sickening truth was spelled out in black ink. They were quite literally gambling away my grandson's health. "And what about Derek?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper. "Who exactly is this man claiming to be the demanding landlord?" Bill pulled out a comprehensive background check, complete with a stark, intimidating police mugshot of the heavily tattooed man I had seen kissing Monica on the porch. "Derek is not a landlord, Rick. He does not own a single piece of real estate in this entire state. The house your daughter-in-law lives in is still fully owned by the bank under your deceased son's name. Derek is a convicted felon. He served 5 full years in a maximum security state penitentiary for orchestrating a massive coordinated insurance fraud ring. He specialized in staging catastrophic automotive accidents to collect massive insurance payouts. He was officially released on parole exactly 8 months before your son Lucas died." The air in the motel room instantly froze solid. The deadly connection was right there, staring me directly in the face, but Bill was not finished yet. He slid one final devastating piece of paper across the small table. It was an official employment record. The horrifying pivot of the entire nightmare. "This is the part that is going to break you, Rick," Bill said very softly. When Derek was released on parole, he needed legitimate, verifiable employment to satisfy his strict parole officer. He got a job at a local automotive repair shop located on the east side of the city. I looked closely at the business name printed clearly at the very top of the formal employment record. It was the exact same auto shop where Lucas always confidently took his truck for routine maintenance. "Derek was the lead mechanic on duty the week your son died," Bill explained, his voice heavy with dreadful absolute certainty. I pulled the service logs directly from the shop's digital archives. Exactly 48 hours before the fatal crash on Route 9, Lucas brought his truck in for a comprehensive brake inspection. The mechanic who signed off on the safety inspection, the man who had unrestricted, unmonitored access to the undercarriage and the brake lines of that specific vehicle, was Derek. The horrifying truth slammed into me with the destructive force of a runaway freight train. My son was brutally murdered by those two monsters. Sitting alone in that suffocating motel room, staring at the peeling wallpaper, and listening to the faint sounds transmitting through the live audio feed, I waited exactly 4 days. The bug was working perfectly, capturing the terrifying reality of my grandson's daily existence. But I needed the high-definition files stored directly on the memory card to build an undeniable case. I could not rely on the wireless transmission alone, not when the stakes involved the brutal murder of my son. On Wednesday afternoon, I gathered my belongings, checked out of the cheap motel, and drove my truck back toward the affluent suburban perimeter. I rehearsed my constructed alibi over and over in my head as the snowy landscape rolled past the icy windshield. I was the disappointed, sickly old man whose dream vacation had been cut short by an unforgiving bout of food poisoning. It was a pathetic narrative designed to stroke Monica's arrogant ego. I pulled into her pristine driveway just after 2 o'clock. The neighborhood was quiet, the pale winter sun casting long shadows across the frozen lawns. I stepped out of my truck, forcing my shoulders to slump, slowing my pace to mimic the weary shuffle of a defeated man. I walked up the icy steps and pressed the doorbell. After a minute, the oak door swung open. Monica stood in the doorway wearing her usual oversized wool sweater. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw me. "Rick," she gasped, her hands flying defensively to her chest. "What are you doing here? I thought you were in the Florida Keys." I offered her a trembling smile and let out a theatrical sigh. "I was Monica," I muttered quietly, making my voice sound hoarse and tired. "But I caught a severe stomach bug on the second day. I spent the entire time violently ill, locked inside the cabin bathroom. The lodge doctor said it was severe food poisoning. I could not handle being away from home feeling that sick, so I changed my flight and came back early to rest in my own bed." Monica's face instantly shifted, the brief flash of panic melting back into her performance of the caring daughter-in-law. "Oh my goodness." "Rick," she cooed softly, reaching out to squeeze my arm. "That is absolutely awful. You poor thing. You should be at home resting right now. Do you need me to make you some warm soup or get you some medicine?" I shook my head slowly, keeping my eyes cast downward. "No thank you, dear. I am just going to head straight home and sleep for a few days. I just wanted to drop by quickly and see my grandson before I crashed." As if on cue, Leo appeared cautiously in the hallway behind her. He looked absolutely terrified, his small frame rigid, his wide eyes darting frantically toward the staircase. I deliberately kept my distance, knowing my physical presence was a dangerous variable in his terrifying world. "Hey there, buddy," I said softly. "Grandpa just came to say hello." As I spoke, my sharp eyes carefully scanned the front porch. The wooden toy fire truck was sitting exactly where I had placed it, tucked neatly beside the heavy terracotta planter. I took a sluggish step backward, my heavy work boot nudging the planter, just enough to give me a clear reach. "Well, I really should let you get back to your rest," Monica said firmly, stepping slightly forward, clearly eager to get me off her property before Derek arrived unexpectedly. I nodded slowly, letting out another tired sigh. "I will let you go," I said politely. But as I turned around to leave, I smoothly bent down and scooped up the red wooden fire truck directly from the freezing porch floor. I ran my thumb over the back axle, feigning a sudden mild concern. "You know, Monica, I noticed this back wheel was getting a little loose the last time I saw him playing with it. I am going to take it back to my workshop and tighten the hardware so it does not snap off and hurt him. I will bring it right back next week when I feel better." Monica barely even glanced at the toy in my hands. She was far too relieved that I was finally leaving, focused on getting the door shut between us. "Oh, of course, Rick. Thank you for fixing it. Feel better, okay? Get some restful sleep." I promised her I would, turned my back, and walked down the paved driveway. The interaction had lasted exactly 3 minutes. 3 agonizing minutes of holding my breath, playing the fool, and staring directly into the deceitful eyes of the woman who had helped orchestrate the murder of my only son. I climbed into the cab of my truck, tossed the wooden fire truck onto the passenger seat, and locked the doors. The moment I pulled out of her neighborhood and turned onto the busy highway, the weak facade vanished. My posture straightened firmly. My jaw clamped shut like a steel vise. The adrenaline flooded my veins, burning hot and lethally focused. The hollowed toy sitting on the seat next to me felt vastly heavier than a solid block of pure lead. It contained the absolute, undeniable truth. It contained the dark reality of what my grandson was physically enduring, and perhaps the final missing pieces connecting Derek and Monica directly to the fatal crash on Route 9. I drove with mechanical precision, ignoring the biting, winter cold radiating through the cracked windows. The city blurred rapidly past me, a gray, frozen wasteland perfectly mirroring the absolute coldness growing steadily in my shattered heart. I drove straight back to my cramped apartment complex, parked my truck perfectly, and marched quickly up the stairs to my door. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt and stepped inside, shutting the solid door firmly behind me. I did not bother turning on the main overhead lights. The fading afternoon sun filtered softly through the slatted plastic blinds, casting dusty gray shadows across the worn living room floor. I walked straight into my small office and carefully placed the red wooden fire truck onto the center of the scratched wooden desk. I pulled my heavy steel toolbox from the dark corner and quickly retrieved a small, sharp precision knife. My thick hands were remarkably steady. I carefully pried the thin, brilliantly concealed strip of raw cedar away from the hollowed-out undercarriage of the innocent toy. The strong adhesive snapped loudly with a sharp, incredibly satisfying crack. I reached cautiously inside the dark cavity and extracted the military-grade listening device. It was freezing cold, to the physical touch, a tiny metallic disc holding countless hours of terrifying, damning secrets. I firmly pressed the small release button on the side of the bug, and the microscopic SD card popped smoothly out into my waiting palm. I sat down heavily in my worn office chair and quickly booted up my laptop. The monitor screen flared brilliantly to life, casting a harsh, glowing bluish-white light entirely across my deeply weathered, exhausted face. I stared intensely at the tiny, fragile black card resting lightly between my rough, calloused fingers. This was exactly it. The ultimate point of no return. I pushed the tiny memory card firmly into the side port of my humming laptop. A digital file folder immediately popped up on the bright screen, practically overflowing with dozens of compressed audio files. I slowly picked up my heavy black headphones, gripping the soft padded ear cups very tightly. I took one final incredibly slow, deeply shuddering breath, completely bracing myself for the absolute horrors I was about to finally uncover, and firmly placed the headphones securely over my ears. The first audio file began with a sharp burst of static before settling into the ambient noise of my son's living room. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds paint a vivid, horrifying picture in my mind. For the first 20 minutes, it was agonizingly mundane. I heard the clinking of silverware against ceramic plates. I heard the muffled, heavy thud of footsteps pacing across the hardwood floor. Then the distinct, booming voice of a television announcer echoed through the tiny microphone. It was a Sunday evening football broadcast. Derek had clearly made himself right at home, lounging in the very living room my hard-earned money had helped furnish, drinking my son's liquor and watching a game on the television I had purchased for them last Christmas. The sheer audacity of his comfortable presence made my blood boil, but I forced myself to remain completely still and listen. I needed every single second of this documented. The ambient sounds continued. A beer bottle popped open, a heavy belch, and then cutting through the background noise of the television, I heard a small, fragile sound. It was a dry, ragged cough. Leo was struggling. I gripped the edges of my wooden desk as the coughing grew slightly louder. I knew that sound intimately. It was the harsh, rattling wheeze of my grandson's chronic asthma acting up. Usually when that happened, Lucas would gently scoop the boy up, bring him into the kitchen, and administer his inhaler with a calm, reassuring voice. But Lucas was gone. Now Leo was completely at the mercy of a monster. The coughing fit persisted, breaking through the booming cheers of the televised football stadium. Derek let out a sharp, irritated groan. "Hey, keep it down in there," he barked, his voice thick and aggressive. "I am trying to watch the playoffs." There was a brief pause, a terrifying moment of complete silence from the hallway. Then the small, desperate cough returned, harsher this time, as Leo clearly struggled to draw a full breath into his little lungs. I could picture his small chest heaving, his eyes wide with panic as he tried to suppress the natural biological reaction of his own failing airway. Derek cursed loudly, the sound of heavy boots slamming against the floorboards, as he pushed himself up from the couch. The heavy footsteps moved rapidly toward the hallway. My entire body went rigid. I stopped breathing entirely, my hands curling into tight, white-knuckled fists. "I told you to shut your mouth!" Derek roared, his voice suddenly echoing right next to the hidden microphone. I heard a small, terrified whimper from Leo. "I am sorry," the boy whispered, his voice trembling with a sheer, absolute terror that shattered my heart into a million jagged pieces. "I need my medicine. My chest hurts." The response was not a comforting word or the hiss of a medical inhaler. It was a sharp, sickening, violent crack of flesh striking flesh. The unmistakable, horrifying sound of a heavy slap echoed through the headphones, ringing in my ears like a gunshot. It was immediately followed by a sharp gasp and the dull thud of a small body hitting the wooden floorboards. Then came the crying. It was not the loud, demanding wail of a child who had scraped a knee. It was the high, breathless, stifled sobbing of a boy who had been trained through brutal violence to keep his pain as quiet as possible. Every single muffled sob tore through my soul. "Shut up," Derek snarled, his voice dropping to a menacing, lethal growl. "You are doing this on purpose just to ruin my weekend. Stop crying before I give you a real reason to cry." I ripped the headphones off my ears, gasping for air as if I was the one suffocating. I stumbled backward, knocking my office chair onto the floor with a loud crash. A blinding primal rage consumed my entire body. My vision actually went red around the edges. In that terrifying, dark moment, I was no longer a civilized man. I was a vicious, protective predator, ready to tear another human being apart with my bare, trembling hands. I wanted to grab the heavy steel tire iron from my toolbox, kick down Monica's pristine front door, and shatter every single bone in Derek's body. I wanted to make him feel the exact same sheer, helpless terror he was inflicting upon a sick, defenseless 7-year-old boy. My hand instinctively reached for the brass handle of my office door. But I stopped. I froze right there in the middle of the dim room. If I drove over there and killed him, I would spend the rest of my life in a federal penitentiary. Leo would be left completely alone, entirely trapped in the dark system, or worse, left solely in the custody of his mother. I had to be smart. I had to finish building the trap. I forced myself to pick the wooden chair back up. I sat down, my entire body shaking with a violent, unrestrained fury, and placed the headphones back over my ears. The terrible sobbing was still echoing through the small speakers. Derek was still standing over him, muttering vulgar, cruel threats. And then I heard the rapid, light clicking of high heels marching down the hallway. It was Monica. My breath caught in my throat. Despite everything I had already deduced, some small, desperate, foolish part of my fatherly heart hoped that she would intervene. I hoped that the primal, fierce instinct of a mother would suddenly awake. I hoped she would scream at Derek, push him away, and scoop her injured, weeping child into her protective arms. I prayed for a tiny sliver of humanity to shine through the darkness. "What is going on out here?" Monica demanded, her voice sharp and intensely annoyed. "The game is so loud I cannot even hear myself think." "He will not stop making that annoying hacking noise," Derek complained, sounding like a petulant, cruel child. "He is ruining my entire Sunday." I held my breath, waiting for Monica to explode in righteous anger at the sight of her son cowering on the floor. Instead, her voice chimed in with a cold, terrifying detachment that completely chilled the blood running through my veins. It was a tone completely devoid of any recognizable maternal instinct. It was the voice of a purely evil, calculating monster. "Well, just put him away," then she sighed casually, as if she were talking about a bothersome house pet. "Leave him in the dark closet under the stairs until he learns how to be quiet. And for crying out loud, Derek, do not hit his face, you absolute idiot. The old man is coming back tomorrow morning and he cannot see any fresh bruises. You know how suspicious Rick gets. You have to use your head." The audio file abruptly ended with the agonizing sound of a heavy wooden door slamming shut, plunging my innocent grandson into complete terrifying darkness alone. I sat completely frozen inside the dead quiet room for a long, agonizing time. I had just listened to pure, unadulterated, calculated evil. I sat frozen inside the quiet room for a long, agonizing time. I had just listened to pure, calculated evil. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to interlock my fingers and press them against my knees to steady myself. The silence following the slam of that closet door was the most terrifying sound I had ever experienced. My grandson was trapped in the pitch-black, dark, nursing bruised ribs entirely alone. I wanted to sprint out to my truck, but I knew I could not blow my cover yet. I needed the final, irrefutable nail in their coffin. I dragged the digital slider across the screen of my laptop, fast-forwarding through the mundane hours of Derek watching football and Monica chatting on her phone. I watched the audio waveform scrolling past, looking for a sudden, jagged spike in the volume. It happened just past midnight on the recording. The smooth green lines on my screen suddenly erupted into violent red peaks. I clicked the mouse to resume normal playback speed and leaned closer to the monitor. The unmistakable sounds of a vicious alcohol-fueled argument flooded through my headphones. A glass shattered sharply against a wall, followed by Monica screaming at the top of her lungs. "You are bleeding us completely dry, Derek," she shrieked, her voice thick and slurred with wine. "I just checked the offshore accounts. You dropped another $15,000 at the blackjack tables this weekend. We have barely enough left to cover the property taxes for the next 2 quarters. Derek scoffed loudly, his heavy boots pacing across the hardwood floor. "Do not lecture me about money, you ungrateful witch," he bellowed back, his voice dripping with venomous contempt. "I am the only reason you are sitting in this fancy house wearing designer clothes right now. You would still be playing the miserable, struggling housewife if it was not for me. I earned that money. I took the massive risk and I deserve to enjoy the rewards." Monica let out a sharp, mocking laugh that sent a fresh wave of disgust washing over my body. "You earned it," she sneered cruelly. "You are a glorified mechanic who got lucky. I am the one who had to play the grieving widow. I am the one who had to sit in that freezing cemetery and cry on command for Rick and the entire neighborhood. I am the one who manages the accounts, pays the bills, and keeps that stupid old man fooled, so he keeps sending us his checks. Without my brilliant acting, you would be back in a cramped prison cell, eating stale bread. Do not ever forget who is actually in charge here, Derek. You are nothing but my hired help." The sheer audacity of her words hung heavily in the tense audio feed. I could hear Derek breathing heavily, a low, dangerous, animalistic sound. The power dynamic in their toxic relationship was fracturing under the immense pressure of their own incredible greed. They had successfully pulled off the ultimate crime, but there was no honor among thieves. They were rapidly running out of stolen funds, and they were turning on each other like starving wolves in a locked cage. "You think you are in charge," Derek hissed, his voice dropping an octave into a deep, menacing growl. The sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps moved closer to the hidden microphone. I heard Monica let out a sudden, startled gasp as he presumably backed her into a corner of the living room. "You really think you hold all the leverage here, Monica? Let go of my arm," she demanded, though her voice wavered with a sudden, genuine spike of fear. "You are hurting me." Derek did not let go. Instead, his voice erupted into an explosive, terrifying roar that nearly blew out the tiny speakers inside my headphones. "You think I am scared of you?" he screamed with a raw, unhinged fury. "I crawled under that truck and cut your husband's brake lines so you could collect a $500,000 life insurance policy. You blew all that cash in Vegas, and now we are living off an old man's $800 charity." The words echoed through my quiet apartment like explosive detonations. I stopped breathing. The entire world around me simply ceased to exist. I crawled under that truck and cut your husband's brake lines. The brutal, unapologetic confession hung in the air, a definitive confirmation of the darkest nightmare a father could ever endure. They did not just let Lucas drive a faulty vehicle. They did not just turn a blind eye to a mechanical issue. Derek had physically slid his body underneath the rusted chassis of my son's truck in the freezing night and deliberately severed his only lifeline. And Monica had orchestrated the entire execution for a pile of paper money she had already managed to gamble away in the bright casinos of Nevada. My son, my good honest boy, had been slaughtered for nothing. His life had been exchanged for a fleeting few years of luxury shopping sprees and high-stakes card games. And when the massive payout inevitably dried up, they had seamlessly pivoted their parasitic strategy. They turned their greedy, blood-stained hands toward the grieving father, stringing me along with the fake promise of supporting my grandson, bleeding my hard-earned retirement savings dry a few $100s at a time. I pressed the pause button. The silence in my office was absolute. I removed the headphones and placed them onto the desk. My hands were no longer shaking. The violent rage that had consumed me had completely vanished. It was replaced by a terrifying glacial calmness. It was the icy mindset of an architect staring at a flawed blueprint. The investigation was officially over. I possessed the audio recording. I possessed the financial records Bill had gathered. I possessed the undeniable connection between Derek and my son's fatal vehicle inspection. I sat perfectly still, reviewing the evidence. If I handed this file over to the district attorney right now, they would arrest Monica and Derek. There would be a highly publicized trial. Expensive defense attorneys would attempt to discredit the hidden recording. They would drag my traumatized grandson onto a public witness stand and force him to recount his horrific abuse in front of a crowded room of strangers. The justice system was a slow, flawed machine, and I refused to subject my innocent grandson to another moment of suffering. I was not going to let a judge decide their fate. I was going to construct a flawless, inescapable, and devastating trap. I stood up from my desk and walked toward the small window looking out over the cold, sleeping city. The sun had set, and a fresh layer of white snow was falling gracefully from the dark, cloudy sky. I closed my eyes and pictured Lucas. I pictured his bright, warm smile. I pictured the exact way he used to laugh whenever we worked together in the garage. I made a silent, unbreakable promise to his memory. I was going to deliver a profound, absolutely terrifying, and completely ultimate reckoning tonight. I sat completely frozen in the overwhelming silence of my dim office, the heavy black headphones pressing tightly against my waiting ears. The phantom echoes of Derek screaming his murderous confession still vibrated through the stale air of the room. "I crawled under that truck and cut your husband's brake lines." The words were a physical weight pressing down against my chest. But the raw, unadulterated shock had already passed, replaced by a terrifying glacial clarity. I reached out with a perfectly steady hand and placed the headphones back over my ears. I needed to hear the rest of it. I needed to hear exactly how the woman who had vowed to love my son would respond to the horrific reality of his execution. My finger hovered over the laptop trackpad for a brief second before I firmly clicked the play button to resume the paused recording. The audio hissed back to life. Derek was breathing heavily, taking sharp, ragged gasps of air like a cornered animal. I braced myself, expecting to hear Monica break down into hysterical tears or scream in feigned horror. I waited for any tiny shred of remaining humanity to claw its way up from the dark depths of her soul. Instead, the response that flowed through the tiny digital speakers was so incredibly cold and calculated that it practically froze the blood pumping through my veins. There was no panic in her voice. There was no shock or denial. "Lower your voice right now, you complete idiot." Monica hissed, her tone sharp and incredibly precise. She spoke with the eerie, detached calm of a venomous snake preparing to strike its oblivious prey. The neighbors are going to hear you shouting like a lunatic. Do you want to ruin everything we have worked so hard to build over a few stupid hands of blackjack? Derek scoffed loudly, but I could hear the immediate shift in his aggressive posture. His heavy boots shuffled awkwardly across the floorboards. I am just tired of waiting, he grumbled, his voice dropping into a sullen, frustrated mutter. We took all the massive risks. I am the one who had to sneak into that freezing garage and slice those lines. I am the one who had to make sure the fluid drain looked like a natural structural failure. And now we are scrounging for pennies, while that old man sits on a mountain of cash. Monica let out a long, theatrical sigh, the kind of sound a weary mother makes when dealing with a particularly stubborn child. Calm down, and use your head for one single minute, she commanded, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial, deadly whisper. You just have to be patient. Rick is an old, broken man, and he already has a bad heart. The immense, crushing stress of Lucas dying is already killing him from the inside out. He looks more exhausted and fragile every single time I see him. We do not have to wait forever. When he finally drops dead from the sheer grief of it all, the entire remainder of his massive estate goes directly into a private financial trust for Leo. As Leo's sole surviving parent and primary legal guardian, I will have absolute unchecked control over that entire trust fund until he turns 18, Monica explained, her voice practically vibrating with dark, greedy excitement. We are not just talking about a $500,000 insurance payout anymore, Derek. We are talking about millions. Millions of dollars in commercial real estate liquid assets and high-yield retirement accounts. All of it will fall right into our laps. You just have to play along and keep your temper in check for a little while longer. Let the old fool think he is helping us. Let him keep sending his pathetic little $800 charity checks to cover our weekend trips. It is a tiny temporary inconvenience for a massive permanent payday. Derek let out a slow, appreciative whistle. A millionaire, he murmured the naked greed, completely masking his previous violent anger. You really think the old man is going to croak soon? Look at him. Monica replied cruelly, her voice dripping with absolute unfiltered disdain. He is a walking corpse. The man can barely muster a smile without looking like he is about to collapse. The Florida fishing trip is probably just a desperate attempt to lower his blood pressure. We just have to keep Leo quiet, keep our heads down, and wait for nature to take its inevitable, highly profitable course. Now pour me another glass of wine and come sit down. The audio feed seamlessly transitioned into the sickening, casual sounds of two monsters clinking heavy crystal wine glasses together to celebrate their brilliant, blood-soaked future. They were toasting to the murder of my son and eagerly drinking to my impending death. I reached up and pulled the heavy black headphones slowly from my ears. I set them down onto the scratched wooden surface of my desk with incredibly deliberate, methodical care. The silence of my dim apartment rushed back in to completely fill the suffocating void. I did not cry. My eyes were entirely dry, devoid of even a single solitary tear. I did not scream. My throat was perfectly relaxed, my breathing steady and deeply controlled. The profound, paralyzing grief that had anchored my soul to the bottom of a dark ocean for 4 agonizing years simply evaporated into thin air. Every single ounce of sorrow, every sleepless night, every hollow, agonizing pang of loss was instantly burned away by the white-hot intensity of my absolute, unyielding focus. I reached over to my humming laptop and carefully pressed my thumb against the small plastic ridge of the SD card. With a soft click, the tiny black square popped out of the side port. I picked it up, holding it gently between my thumb and forefinger. This incredibly small, fragile piece of plastic was the deadliest weapon I had ever possessed. It held the irrefutable, undeniable truth that would completely obliterate their entire existence. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a small, clear plastic evidence bag I had kept from an old construction site inspection. I dropped the memory card inside and sealed the tight plastic ridge along the very top. I placed the transparent bag directly into the center of my desk, right under the warm, glowing light of my brass reading lamp. Monica and Derek believed they were incredibly smart. They truly believed that my grief was a fatal weakness, a terminal condition that would neatly solve all of their financial problems and hand them the keys to my kingdom. They had grossly miscalculated the profound nature of a father's love. I was not going to simply hand this plastic bag over to a bored detective and let the slow, unpredictable wheels of the judicial system dictate their ultimate punishment. They wanted my millions. They wanted a luxurious life built on the shattered, bloody foundation of my dead son. The grieving father they thought they knew was officially dead and gone. I was going to wipe them completely off of the earth. The very next morning, I woke long before the sun even considered rising. I walked to my closet and pulled out the dark suit I had worn to my son's funeral. I brushed the dust off the lapels, my hands moving with mechanical precision. Today was not a day for a grieving father's worn flannel shirts or scuffed work boots. Today was a day for war, and I needed to be dressed appropriately for the battlefield. I drove directly past the local police precinct without giving it a second glance. The local authorities had casually stamped a simple accident report on my son's murder and filed it away. I was not going to risk handing my only piece of undeniable leverage over to an overworked detective who might mishandle the evidence. I needed a predator. I drove straight into the bustling financial heart of the city, pulling up to a towering skyscraper made entirely of sleek black glass and cold steel. I rode the silent high-speed elevator up to the penthouse floor, stepping out into the pristine reception area of Pierce & Associates. Victor Pierce was the most ruthless, heavily feared corporate attorney in the entire state. Decades ago, my construction firm had retained his services to obliterate a corrupt supplier who had tried to extort me. Victor did not practice law with compassion. He practiced law with the surgical precision of a trained assassin. He was an expensive, cold-blooded mercenary in a $3,000 suit, and he was exactly the man I needed to orchestrate this final execution. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of his private office. Victor was sitting behind his massive desk, his sharp gray eyes snapping up from his paperwork. "Rick," he said, genuinely surprised by my unannounced appearance. "You look like a man who is about to burn the world down. Sit. Tell me what has happened." I did not just sit down. I dropped Bill's massive financial dossier directly onto the polished center of his pristine desk, followed immediately by the sealed plastic evidence bag containing the tiny black memory card. "I need you to completely dismantle two human beings," I said, my voice stripped of any human emotion. "I need their assets frozen, their physical freedom revoked, and their entire lives reduced to absolute, unrecoverable ashes. They murdered my son, Victor, and they have been bleeding me dry while planning to inherit my entire estate." Victor did not ask any pointless questions. He simply picked up the financial dossier and began reading. As his eyes scanned the highlighted routing numbers and offshore casino transfers, his expression tightened into a formidable, dangerous mask. He picked up his desk phone, pressed a single button, and issued a sharp command. 5 minutes later, the heavy office doors opened again. A tall, incredibly broad-shouldered man, wearing a dark, nondescript suit, stepped into the room. He carried a leather briefcase and possessed the vigilant, calculating posture of a seasoned law enforcement official. "Rick, this is Special Agent Harris," Victor said smoothly, gesturing toward the newcomer. "He works for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically focusing on interstate wire fraud and major financial crimes. If what you are telling me is accurate, we are completely bypassing the local homicide detectives. Your daughter-in-law and her mechanic friend made a fatal, catastrophic mistake. When they took that fraudulently obtained life insurance money across state lines and funneled it through offshore gambling accounts, they committed a massive federal crime. They invited the full crushing weight of the United States government directly into their living room." I gestured toward the plastic evidence bag sitting on the desk. "You need to listen to this," I told them softly. Both of them. Victor inserted the tiny memory card into his encrypted computer system. I sat perfectly still as the horrifying alcohol-fueled argument echoed through the immaculate soundproofed office. We sat in total silence as Derek screamed his unapologetic, brutal confession about sliding under Lucas's truck and severing the brake lines. We listened as Monica coldly, calculatingly explained her dark plan to patiently wait for my failing heart to finally give out so she could steal millions from my vulnerable grandson's trust fund. The audio file ended, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. Special Agent Harris slowly closed his leather briefcase. The sheer, predatory intensity radiating from his eyes was almost palpable. The local police might have bungled the initial traffic collision report, Rick the agent said, his voice a deep rumble of absolute authority. But federal courts do not care about small-town traffic reports. This is a premeditated, financially motivated homicide strictly tied to interstate wire fraud. I have successfully put cartel bosses away for a lot less than what is sitting on this digital recording. We are going to build an ironclad, completely inescapable cage right around them. For the next 4 hours, we meticulously laid the foundation for their total destruction. There would be absolutely no warning letters, no polite knocks on the front door, and zero opportunities for them to contact expensive defense attorneys. Victor immediately began drafting the emergency injunctions to legally freeze every single bank account associated with Monica and Derek. He completely locked down the life insurance payout, the offshore casino cards, and my grandson's temporary custody arrangements. By the time the sun began to set behind the city skyline, they had effectively stripped Monica and Derek of every single financial resource they possessed, without them even realizing it. Now, Agent Harris stated firmly, "We need to execute the arrests. I want them entirely off guard where they cannot destroy evidence or flee. Do you know of any events where they will be fully distracted?" A dark, satisfying smile crept across my face. "This coming Saturday night," I replied. "Monica is throwing herself a lavish birthday party. She hired a private catering company, a professional bartender, and a local band." Victor looked directly at me with a highly perceptive gleam. "Let me guess," he murmured. "You generously paid for this entire celebration." I nodded slowly. "I gave her $5,000 to ensure a perfect evening," I confirmed. "She thinks I am in a Florida fishing cabin. Derek will definitely be there playing the gracious host in a house he murdered my son to control." Agent Harris jotted down the exact address. "An extravagant, crowded birthday party," he mused, a grim smile touching his mouth. "It is the perfect operational theater. We will organize the strike teams immediately. We will lock down the perimeter, breach the doors, and take them down in front of every single person they know. There will be absolutely nowhere for them to hide." I stood up from the heavy leather chair, methodically buttoning the front of my dark funeral suit while looking at the agent. The agonizing hunt was drawing to an explosive close. The trap was completely built, expertly baited, and armed with federal teeth. All I had to do right now was patiently wait for Saturday night to arrive. I was going to walk right through her front doors and watch her luxurious world violently shatter into a million pieces. Saturday night arrived with a biting, bitter cold that perfectly matched the absolute frost running through my veins. I sat perfectly still in the back of an unmarked, heavily armored federal surveillance van parked discreetly down the street from the affluent suburban home I had foolishly helped purchase. Special Agent Harris sat beside me in the dim blue glow of the tactical monitors. Through the high-definition camera feeds, we had a clear, unobstructed view of the lavish birthday celebration completely engulfing the property. The heavy, rhythmic thumping of an expensive sound system vibrated through the frozen air, rattling the thick metal walls of our vehicle. Through the large bay windows, I could see hired caterers in crisp white uniforms, circulating among a sea of oblivious, well-dressed guests. They carried silver trays loaded with expensive champagne flutes and gourmet appetizers. Monica was holding court in the center of the spacious living room wearing a stunning, tailored crimson dress that I was absolutely certain my stolen money had paid for. She was laughing brightly, her head thrown back in feigned, careless joy. Derek stood near the kitchen island holding a dark liquor drink and laughing aggressively with a group of men he had undoubtedly lied to about his sudden, unearned wealth. It was a sickening, opulent display of total arrogance built entirely on the grave of my murdered son. I watched their smiling faces on the glowing monitor, completely devoid of any pity or hesitation. Agent Harris pressed 2 fingers against the small earpiece tucked into his right ear. He gave a sharp, definitive nod. The operation was a go. I stepped out of the heavy sliding door of the van and walked slowly down the icy sidewalk, trailing slightly behind the heavily armed tactical unit. The crisp night air stung my lungs, but I welcomed the sharp burning sensation. We marched straight up the pristine paved driveway. The loud pulsing music completely masked the heavy synchronized footsteps of the federal agents. The strike team stacked up tightly against the front porch, their dark tactical gear blending seamlessly into the winter shadows. A massive steel battering ram was hoisted into position. There was no polite knock. There was no authoritative demand to open up. With a violent earth-shattering crash, the solid oak front door was completely blown off its reinforced hinges. The heavy wood splintered and flew inward, crashing hard onto the expensive tiled entryway. A thick cloud of gray tactical smoke instantly flooded the main corridor. Brilliant, blinding beams of white light from mounted flashlights sliced through the swirling haze, completely disorienting the screaming, panicked crowd. The pulsing dance music was abruptly cut off, instantly replaced by the terrifying, deafening shouts of federal agents storming the premises. "Nobody move," a booming voice echoed through the chaotic room. "Get your hands where we can see them." Guests shrieked in absolute terror, dropping their expensive drinks. Crystal champagne flutes shattered against the hardwood floors, sending sparkling liquid and sharp shards flying in every direction. The pristine, lavish birthday party disintegrated into total screaming pandemonium in less than 10 seconds. I stood completely still on the frozen front lawn, watching the precise surgical execution of federal justice. Through the shattered doorway, I immediately spotted Derek. The arrogant, boastful mechanic had completely vanished. The moment he saw the tactical gear and the blinding flashlights, pure cowardly panic seized his entire body. He did not try to protect Monica. He did not try to explain. He immediately turned his back on his partner and violently shoved his way through the screaming crowd, sprinting desperately toward the rear sliding glass doors. He thought he could slip away into the dark, frozen backyard and vanish into the night. He was violently mistaken. Before his heavy boots could even reach the kitchen threshold, a massive federal agent intercepted his path. Derek tried to pivot wildly, throwing a desperate, clumsy punch to clear his escape route. The agent smoothly deflected the heavy blow, grabbed Derek by the lapels of his expensive dress shirt, and forcefully drove him backward. Derek lost his footing on the slippery champagne-soaked floorboards. With a sickening, explosive crash, the agent tackled Derek directly through a large, heavy glass coffee table resting in the center of the living room. The thick pane of decorative glass shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces underneath Derek's immense weight. He let out a loud, agonizing groan as the federal agent pinned him brutally against the floor, twisting his arms violently behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting securely around his wrists echoed above the surrounding chaos. Derek thrashed blindly, spitting blood and cursing loudly, but he was completely immobilized, his pathetic attempt at a cowardly escape entirely thwarted. Across the ruined living room, Monica stood completely frozen in a state of absolute, paralyzing shock. Her face was entirely drained of color, her eyes wide with a frantic, uncomprehending terror. The crimson dress suddenly looked completely absurd amidst the tactical gear and shattered glass. An agent firmly grabbed her bare arm. She let out a piercing, hysterical shriek, dropping her half-empty champagne flute onto the floor. "Get your hands off me!" she screamed, her voice cracking wildly as she tried to pull away from the firm grip. "You have absolutely no right to be here. This is a private party. We have done nothing wrong. The agent ignored her frantic, pathetic protests, swiftly securing her wrists tightly behind her back with another pair of steel handcuffs. "You are making a massive mistake," she wailed, her pristine makeup beginning to run down her pale, terrified face. Agent Harris stepped forward through the clearing smoke, his presence commanding absolute silence from the few guests still daring to whisper. "Monica Vance," he stated, his deep voice carrying a lethal, undeniable authority. "You are under arrest for massive interstate wire fraud. But more importantly, you and Derek are both under arrest for first-degree conspiracy to commit murder." The entire room went completely, shockingly dead. The words seemed to physically strike Monica. Her knees buckled slightly, and the agent holding her had to haul her back upright. "Murder," she gasped weakly, her eyes darting frantically around the destroyed room. "I do not know what you are talking about. You are completely crazy." It was at that exact moment that I finally stepped through the splintered, ruined doorway. The blinding beams of the flashlights illuminated my dark funeral suit. I walked slowly, my footsteps crunching loudly against the broken wood and shattered crystal littering the entryway. Monica saw me. Her mouth dropped open, her eyes bulging with a sudden, horrifying realization. "Rick," she sobbed, her voice instantly adopting a pathetic, whining, pleading tone. "Rick, please tell them. Tell them this is a huge mistake. We are your family. Please, Rick, you have to help me." I did not stop walking. I did not slow my pace. I walked directly past her trembling, handcuffed form, as if she was nothing more than a ghost, a completely invisible, irrelevant entity occupying empty space. I did not scream at her. I did not curse her name or demand hollow apologies. I simply walked past her trembling form, my eyes fixed entirely on the hallway stretching beyond the ruined living room. The flashing blue and red emergency lights from outside cast chaotic shadows against the painted walls, but my path was crystal clear. I moved with singular purpose toward the heavy wooden door tucked beneath the main staircase. A tall federal agent stepped aside, instinctively sensing that this specific moment belonged solely to me. I grabbed the brass doorknob, finding it firmly locked from the outside. I did not bother searching for a key. I raised my heavy work boot and kicked the solid wood right near the deadbolt with every ounce of strength I had left. The door violently splintered and flew open, crashing against the interior drywall. I reached into the pitch-black darkness and pulled the chain for the bare overhead bulb. The harsh yellow light flickered to life, revealing a tiny, terrifyingly small shape huddled in the furthest corner among dusty storage boxes. Leo had his knees pulled tightly to his chest, his small hands pressed fiercely over his ears to block out the booming sounds of the tactical raid. He was shaking so violently that his entire body seemed to literally vibrate against the cold floorboards. I immediately dropped to my knees, the sharp pain in my joints entirely forgotten in the face of his terror. I quickly unbuttoned my heavy winter coat, slipped it off my shoulders, and gently draped it around his fragile, trembling frame. He physically flinched at the initial contact, but then his wide, terrified eyes finally met mine. "Grandpa," he softly whispered, his voice incredibly weak and completely raw. I pulled him carefully against my chest, shielding him from the freezing cold and the horrific reality of the massive house. "It is over, buddy," I whispered softly into his hair, letting a single profound tear finally fall from my eye. "We are finally going home." Fast forward exactly 1 year, and the suffocating darkness of that violent winter night feels like a completely different lifetime entirely. The warm golden sunlight of a late spring afternoon washes over the wide wooden porch of my quiet suburban home. I am sitting peacefully in my comfortable rocking chair, carefully gluing the intricate wing of a large model airplane. Sitting right beside me at the small work table is Leo. He is laughing, a bright, clear, and wonderfully melodic sound that fills the fresh air around us. His cheeks are full and rosy, his eyes shining brilliantly with genuine, unburdened childhood joy. His chronic asthma is completely under control, now that he is no longer living in a state of perpetual, suffocating terror. He breathes perfectly fine, taking deep, healthy gulps of the sweet spring air as he hands me the next wooden piece for our project. The dark nightmares still visit him occasionally, but they are fading rapidly, replaced by the steady rhythm of a safe home. As for the deceitful monsters who orchestrated this horrific nightmare, the federal justice system proved far more efficient than they ever anticipated. The overwhelming mountain of undeniable evidence we recovered from the secret audio confessions to the fraudulent offshore financial transfers left them absolutely no room to maneuver in a courtroom. Monica and Derek are currently serving consecutive life sentences in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. They will never breathe free air, never touch a dime of my son's money, and they will never see my grandson again. The sprawling suburban estate they occupied was seized, fully liquidated, and the funds rightfully returned to Leo's heavily protected trust fund managed solely by me. I gently set the wooden airplane down on the table and looked directly into the camera lens. My face is remarkably calm, but my soul has been permanently hardened by the raging fire I willingly walked through to save my family. Blood makes you related, but loyalty and character make you family. I spent 4 years blinding myself to the truth because I wanted to honor my son's memory. But I learned the hard way that evil doesn't care about your grief. It preys on it. When your intuition tells you that a smile is a mask, don't dismiss it. Trust your gut. Evil operates in the shadows, relying on our politeness and denial to survive. Drag it into the light completely and ruthlessly, because true love sometimes requires you to destroy the monsters hiding in your own home. There are people playing the victim right now while holding a knife behind their backs. If you were in my shoes, do you think life in prison is a harsh enough punishment for what they did? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe and always watch your six.